An empire spanning from Korea to Hungary, armies that moved like lightning across continents, a war machine so efficient it crushed civilizations that had stood for millennia. And here's the twist, it ran without a single tax collector. No income tax, no land surveys, treasury officials knocking on doors demanding their share. The Mongol Empire violated every principle we're taught about how states acquire power. And that violation wasn't a bug, it was the entire system. Today, we're dissecting something far more relevant than ancient history. We're uncovering a blueprint for power that never actually died. It just changed clothes. It's just your channel name. Where we follow the money trail through time, because understanding the past is the only way to decode the present. Let's begin. Here's how empires are supposed to work. You conquer territory, you count the people, you measure the land, you build a bureaucracy to extract wealth from your subjects. Taxes on harvests, taxes on trade, taxes on property. That revenue funds your armies, which conquer more territory, which generates more taxes. Rome perfected this cycle, so did Persia. So did every Chinese dynasty worth remembering. The formula was simple. Control population, extract resources, maintain order, repeat. But there's a catch built into that model. You need something to tax. You need farmers producing surplus. You need cities generating commerce. You need a sedentary population that can't just pack up and disappear when the taxman arrives. The Mongols had none of this. The steppes of Mongolia weren't fertile river valleys. They were endless grasslands populated by nomads who owned almost nothing and moved constantly. No rice paddies to assess, no merchant quarters to regulate, no granaries to raid. By traditional standards, this was a terrible place to build an empire. Yet from this resource-poor environment emerged a force that would dominate a quarter of humanity. How? Because they asked a completely different question. Traditional empires asked, how do we extract maximum value from the people we control? The Mongols asked, how do we position ourselves where value has no choice but to flow through us? But that distinction is everything. Genghis Khan, born Temujin, in a world that dismissed him, understood something crucial. He couldn't copy the Chinese model or the Persian model. He didn't have their resources. Trying to tax nomads would fracture the very alliances that made Mongol society functional. So instead of administration, he chose positioning. Think about 13th century Eurasia. Trade routes existed between China, the Islamic world, and Europe, but barely. Every border meant tariffs, every city meant tolls. Merchants were vulnerable to bandits, corrupt officials, and petty warlords at every turn. The Silk Road wasn't a highway. It was a gamble. The Mongols made merchants an offer: submit to Mongol authority, and you'll have something no one else can guarantee: safe passage across the entire continent. Resist, and your city becomes a cautionary tale. This wasn't taxation. This was network security enforced by absolute violence. Caravans under Mongol protection carried pesa metal passes guaranteeing food, lodging, and protection across thousands of miles. Interfering with these merchants became a capital crime. Bandits were annihilated. Corrupt officials were executed publicly. Terror wasn't random. It was strategic enforcement of system integrity. And suddenly, trade didn't limp. It exploded. But the Mongols didn't stop at protection. They innovated further. Enter the Ortok system, a proto-venture capital model that would make modern financiers jealous. Here's how it worked. Mongol elites would partner with wealthy merchants. Mongol provided capital, military protection, and political backing. The merchant provided expertise and handled operations. Profits were split. If the venture succeeded, both parties won. If it failed, the Mongol elite absorbed the loss they could afford to. The merchant, meanwhile, got access to opportunities that would have been impossible alone. This wasn't feudalism. This was incentive alignment at scale. Risk flowed upward to those who could bear it. Reward flowed back into military expansion. The whole system became self-reinforcing. While European kings argued over customs duties, the Mongols were creating what we now call a logistics empire backed by equity partnerships and enforced by lethal consequences. The results were staggering. The Pax Mongolica, Mongol peace, saw goods, technologies, and ideas flow from Beijing to Venice faster than ever before in human history. Paper money concepts, gunpowder, printing techniques, even pasta recipes, all accelerated because the Mongols made movement predictable. Cities that cooperated became prosperous nodes in the network. Cities that disrupted trade were erased not from cruelty, but from economic logic. A disrupted trade route was lost revenue. Removing the disruption wasn't barbarism. It was infrastructure maintenance by other means. Now here's where this stops being ancient history and becomes uncomfortable. The Mongol Empire collapsed in the late 1300s, but the logic didn't. Portugal didn't dominate the age of exploration by taxing harder. It dominated by controlling sea routes around Africa. The Dutch didn't become a global superpower through superior agriculture. They dominated shipping, insurance, and financial clearing. Britain didn't build an empire on taxation alone. It built it by owning the sea lanes and the payment systems that cleared global trade. This is the Mongol model wearing different clothes.
Nice.
And it's still here. Look at modern choke points. The Strait of Hormuz. 1/5 of global oil passes through this narrow waterway. No goods are produced there. No taxes collected. Control it. And you control energy prices worldwide. The Suez Canal, one container ship gets stuck, and global supply chains convulse. Prices spike, factories stall, not because demand vanished, but because movement stopped. The Panama Canal, a drought lowers water levels. Fewer ships pass, delays cascade. Inflation ticks upward across continents. Swift payment systems cut a country off from international banking, and you've effectively removed them from global commerce. No invasion needed. Semiconductor supply chains, a handful of companies control chip production. Disrupt that flow, an entire economy sees. These aren't random infrastructure points. They're modern PESA tablets, gatekeeping mechanisms that determine who participates in the global economy. And just like under Mongol rule, those closest to these choke points don't just survive disruptions, they profit from them. When the Suez Canal blocked, shipping companies rerouted and charged premium rates. When oil tightens, producers coordinate supply. When chips become scarce, manufacturers with priority access win. The Mongols would recognize this instantly. So what does this mean for you? Most people think about wealth in terms of income, salaries, raises, bonuses, but income is downstream. It's what you get after the system has already distributed value. Real leverage accumulates upstream, where goods move, where capital clears, where access is granted or denied. That is why logistics companies outperform manufacturers' payment platforms, capture more value than merchants' financial intermediaries outlast. Producers, landlords in strategic locations outpace workers at S. Not about working harder, it's about positioning in the flow. When crises hit, pandemics, wars, financial shocks, those closest to the flow reroute fastest. They hedge, they adapt. Everyone else absorbs the volatility. The Mongols didn't build their empire by taxing loyalty into existence. They built it by making themselves unavoidable. In a world that still runs on flows of energy, data, capital, goods, that lesson is more relevant than ever. So here's your takeaway. Systems reveal their priorities through structure, not rhetoric. If you want to know where power lives, don't listen to speeches. Watch what gets protected when things break. Watch who stays solvent when systems freeze. Watch who controls access when everyone else is negotiating prices. 800 years ago, nomads from nowhere figured out a principle modern finance still runs on. Power doesn't come from taxing value. It comes from controlling where value must move. That blueprint didn't die with horse archers. It just evolved. If this changed how you see the world, subscribe. There's more where this came from, and I promise it only gets deeper. Till next time, follow the flow.